The law firm's voice went quiet the moment I asked my question. Not the kind of quiet where someone is thinking. The kind of quiet where someone realizes they are standing in a room they should never have walked into. I let it sit there. I did not fill it. And after a few seconds that felt much longer than they were, the only thing they said was, "Sorry to bother you, sir." Then the line went dead. But to understand why that phone call felt like the cleanest moment of justice I have ever experienced, we have to go back to early 2012. Back to a little electronics store inside an expensive outlet mall, and back to the day a fire marshal walked through our front door and accidentally changed the course of my entire life. I want to be clear about something before we go any further. I was not some corporate whistleblower. I was not some seasoned professional with a strategy and a lawyer on speed dial. I was a guy who loved cameras. That was it. That was the whole thing. I loved cameras, I knew cameras, and that love for cameras was the reason I was standing in that store in the first place. I had originally walked in as a customer. I was not looking for a job. I was looking for a specific piece of video equipment, and I started asking the store manager technical questions, very specific technical questions about sensor size, frame rates, compression formats, things that most retail shoppers do not ask. The manager looked at me the way someone looks at a person who has just walked into the wrong building and accidentally turned out to be exactly who they needed. He offered me a job on the spot. I said yes. That is important. Remember that detail. It matters at the end. So there I was, working the camera counter at the only high-end electronics store within 50 miles. We sold top-of-the-line video cameras, professional photography equipment, high-performance laptops, premium cell phones, and these enormous early-generation 4K televisions that cost more than most people's cars. We were the only place in the region selling this kind of gear. We were located in a premium outlet mall. And because those two facts combined to create a very obvious business reality, we had been absolutely crushing our sales targets for 5 years running. 5 consecutive years. Record numbers, every single one. Our team was 12 people. 12 people who genuinely liked each other, genuinely liked their work, and genuinely respected the man running the store. Our manager was not some clipboard-carrying middle management drone. He was a man who had spent decades in the electronics industry, started at CompUSA in the late 80s, moved through Gateway 2000, Circuit City, Fry's, and finally landed with us. He had seen every version of this business. He knew how things worked. And more importantly, he knew how to take care of the people working for him. I want you to hold on to that picture. 12 people. 5 years of success. A manager who genuinely had our backs. Because what happened next was not the result of poor performance or a struggling business. What happened next was purely about money, money that had nothing to do with any of us. It started with the fire marshal. I was at the camera counter on a Tuesday morning, no customers in front of me, just doing my usual thing, when the mall's fire marshal walked in through the front entrance. He was carrying a clipboard and had the look of someone completing a routine task, relaxed, professional, just working through a checklist. He asked to speak to the store manager. I walked him to the back office. My manager looked up from his desk, and the marshal explained that mall management had sent him over to coordinate timing with the construction foreman. He wanted to know when it would be convenient to begin the build-out. My manager frowned. What build-out? The marshal looked mildly confused. He reached into his clipboard and pulled out a work order. A full commercial construction work order. For a brand new location of a very expensive, very high-end clothing store. Being built at our exact address. At our exact storefront. I remember the silence in that back office. I remember looking at my manager. I remember him looking at me. And then we both looked at the marshal, who was slowly starting to realize that the two people standing in front of him had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. He handed my manager the paperwork and excused himself quietly. My manager sat down. He did not say anything for a long moment. He just stared at the work order on his desk like it was written in a language he was still translating. I stood there with my stomach somewhere near the floor, waiting. Finally he looked up and said, "Give me a few days. Don't say anything to anyone yet." Here is the thing I should tell you now, looking back. That moment, that quiet, that work order, that look on my manager's face, that was the first sign. The sign that something had been happening behind all of our backs for a long time. I did not see it clearly then. I just felt uneasy and went back to the camera counter. But looking back, I should have understood in that moment exactly what kind of company we were working for. The kind that treats 12 loyal, high-performing employees as furniture to be removed when the room needs redecorating. A few days later, my manager called a store meeting. All 12 of us gathered in the back before opening. He had asked me beforehand to tell the team what I had witnessed with the fire marshal, which I did. And then he told us the rest. He had called corporate. He had pushed past the verbal gymnastics, his words, and gotten the actual story. And the actual story was this. The clothing brand had been trying to get a spot at our outlet mall for 10 years. 10 years of being told no, of being passed over, of watching other brands take the available storefronts. They wanted this location badly. So they went directly to the CEO of our electronics chain and put a check on the table. A check in the millions. In exchange for breaking the lease on our store and handing the space over to them. The CEO took the check. And then, and this is the part that hit every single person in that room like a wall, corporate had deliberately decided not to tell us. They were going to let us keep working, keep selling, keep performing, right up until the final 2 weeks. No warning. No severance. No letters of recommendation. Just a last day, a closed door, and 12 people standing in a parking lot wondering what happened. The room was completely silent for about 3 seconds after he finished talking. And then it was not silent anymore. I am not going to pretend we handled it with grace in the immediate aftermath. We were furious. Not the loud, explosive kind of furious, the cold, settled kind. The kind that makes people very quiet and very deliberate. Within a week, every one of us was doing the absolute minimum required to keep the lights on. No upselling. No customer outreach. No initiative. Just the bare mechanical functions of keeping a retail store technically operational. Our sales dropped 70% in 7 days. Corporate noticed. They sent someone. A representative. I will be generous and call him a hatchet man, because that was his function. He was sent to figure out why the numbers had cratered and to deliver whatever message corporate wanted delivered. He walked in with the energy of someone who expected to be taken seriously, and he was visibly thrown off by the fact that not a single person in that store was remotely interested in performing for him. He told us the store was closing. He told us there would be no severance. He told us there would be no letters of recommendation. He said this as if he were delivering routine administrative information. As if the 12 people standing in front of him had not spent 5 years building the sales record that made this location worth selling in the first place. My manager, very calmly, very politely, asked him to leave the premises. He said he would handle things from here. The hatchet man left. Now here is where the story changes. Here is where my manager stopped being just a good boss and became something else entirely. Because after the hatchet man walked out that door, my manager did not vent, did not rage, did not make speeches. He went to his office, sat down, and started reading the management handbook. Page by page. He was looking for something specific. And he found it. Deep inside the operational guidelines for store managers, written in plain language that someone had clearly never expected to matter, was a single policy about discretionary discounts. The policy stated that the store manager had the authority to discount any product in the store by up to 90%. The financial offset of any such discount would be absorbed into the annual discretionary cost analysis at the end of the fiscal year. Read that again. Any product. Up to 90% off. Absorbed into end-of-year cost analysis. The store was closing at the end of February. There would be no end-of-year cost analysis. There would be no follow-up. There would be no one left to review the numbers because the entire operation was being dissolved in a matter of weeks. Corporate was so focused on cashing their check and handing over the keys that they had completely failed to think about what a motivated store manager with nothing to lose and an employee discount policy in his hands might decide to do with his final days. He called another store meeting. He explained the policy. He explained the math. He told us that 2 days before our last official day of operation, he was going to authorize a private 90% off sale. Employees and immediate family only. No public announcement. No paper trail beyond what the policy itself already permitted. I remember raising my hand. I remember asking the question that was hanging over every person in that room.
So when you say every item in the store, you mean every item in the store? He looked at me steadily and said, every item. And if you want to set aside what you need now, go ahead. Make a pile in the back room. Label everything. I will include the full premium service warranties at no additional cost. I want you to understand what was available in that store. This was not a budget electronics outlet. This was a premium retailer. The kind of store where a single television could cost more than a semester of college tuition. The kind of store where professional video cameras and audio equipment sat behind glass cases with price tags that made most people step back and just look. I spent a long time in the back room that week, building my pile. A high-definition video camera. A digital still camera. A professional shotgun microphone with XLR connectivity. A laptop. 2 1TB external hard drives. A full-size tripod. A car mount tripod. An underwater camera housing. An action camera. A large format camera bag. A custom shoulder mount camera plate system. multiple high-grade memory cards, spare battery packs. And when my manager mentioned that I could take any of the HDMI and DisplayPort cables currently attached to the showroom displays, cables that normally retail for prices that make grown adults question their life choices, I took those too. On the morning of the sale, we arrived 2 hours before opening, through the back entrance. We paid for our items at the register just like any legitimate transaction, because that is exactly what it was. A legitimate transaction, authorized under existing company policy, by the authorized person with the authority to authorize it. With tax, I paid $1,153.69 for about $13,000 worth of brand new professional electronics. $13,000. The tools of a media business. A camera system, an audio setup, a mobile editing station, storage, and accessories, everything I would have needed to spend years saving for, handed to me in a single morning because a CEO got greedy and a manager got creative. My colleague Marcus, I will call him Marcus, was standing next to me at the register when I paid. He looked at my receipt and then looked at my pile of equipment and said, quietly, "You know what you just bought, right?" I said I thought so. He said, "You just bought your way out. Don't waste it." I did not forget that. As a final gesture, our manager gave every one of us the direct phone number for a caseworker at the local unemployment office, someone who was familiar with our situation and sympathetic to employees who had been let go without severance or proper notice. He made sure we all had what we needed before he walked away. That was the kind of person he was. Even at the end, even after everything, he was still thinking about us. The store closed at the end of February, exactly as corporate had planned. The clothing brand moved in. The outlet mall got its new tenant. The CEO got his check. And 12 people walked out of a shuttered storefront with whatever they had managed to build for themselves in those final days. By March of 2013, I was 1 month into running my own freelance media company. Carefully, cautiously, I was not naive enough to think it would be easy. But I had the equipment. I had the knowledge. I had spent years developing real technical expertise in exactly the field I was now trying to work in. I was shooting music concerts, weddings, corporate event videos. Learning as I went. Building slowly. The gear I had walked out of that store with was doing exactly what it was designed to do, and I was the one holding it. And then, one afternoon, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I answered. A man on the other end identified himself as representing a law firm acting on behalf of the electronics company. He said they were conducting an internal review. He said that about $400,000 worth of merchandise had been sold at a 90% discount in the final days of store operations, and that the company believed the store manager had misused his discount authority. They wanted to know if I had any information about the manager's current whereabouts. I held the phone for a moment. $400,000. That number told me something important. It told me that our entire team, all 12 of us, and probably some of our families, had made the most of what was offered to them. Good. I kept my voice completely level. I told the representative that before I answered his question, I had a question of my own. I asked him why the CEO of an electronics company had accepted a multi-million-dollar payment to break a lease on his own operating store, and why the employees of that store, employees who had delivered 5 consecutive years of record sales, were given 0 notice, 0 severance, and 0 letters of recommendation. The line went quiet. Not the processing kind of quiet. Not the let me check my notes kind of quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when a person realizes they have stepped into a conversation they were not prepared for and cannot win. I said, "Hello?" He said, "Sorry to bother you, sir." The call ended. I put my phone down on the desk next to my camera. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do when moving, building, making noise. And I sat there for a minute, feeling something I can only describe as settled. Not triumphant. Not vindicated in some dramatic way. Just settled. Like a debt had been quietly cleared that I had not even known I was carrying. They never called back. Not me, anyway. And to my knowledge, not a single one of the 12 people who had worked in that store ever gave up our manager's location or any information that would have helped that law firm build a case. We had no legal obligation to protect him, we simply chose to. Because he had protected us first. Because when a corporation decided to treat 12 loyal, high-performing employees like line items to be written off, he had looked at the rulebook they handed him and used it to make sure we landed on our feet. He did not break any law. He exercised a policy that the company itself had written. If they did not like where that policy led, they should have thought about that before they took a check and went quiet. As for me, the freelance media company kept growing. I moved from event videography into post-production, editing, motion graphics. When everyone started shooting video on their phones and the event market shifted, I pivoted into product photography for small businesses and startups. The business changed shape over the years, but it never stopped running. The equipment I bought that morning was the foundation of everything. The camera knowledge I walked into that store with as a customer, the technical expertise that got me hired in the first place, turned out to be the most valuable thing I owned. Nobody gave me that. I had built that myself, long before any of this happened. But I will say this. If the corporate office of that electronics chain had treated their people with basic decency, if they had given proper notice, offered severance, provided references, the story ends differently. The manager has no reason to reach for the handbook. The team has no reason to go quiet. 12 people leave with some dignity and some resources, and a company makes a transition without losing $400,000 in inventory through a policy loophole they wrote themselves. Instead, they chose to be cold. They chose to treat the people who built their 5-year success streak as inconveniences to be quietly removed. And so the story ends the way it ends, with a phone call that lasted less than 2 minutes, a silence on the other end of the line, and a law firm that decided it had nothing more to say. Somewhere out there, a man in his 60s who spent his career at CompUSA, Gateway, Circuit City, Fry's, and one very successful mall electronics store is living his retirement. I genuinely hope it is comfortable. I hope it is peaceful. I hope he knows that none of us, not one person from that team, ever said a word. Some loyalties run deeper than an employment contract. The kind of loyalty that does not need to be asked for because it was already earned. I think about that sometimes when I am sitting behind my editing monitor, working on something I care about, using skills I spent years building. I built this. Not because someone handed it to me, but because when the moment came, I was ready for it. And because one manager decided that if the company was going to play games with the rulebook, he was going to read it more carefully than they ever did. So here's what I want to leave you with. I did not plan any of this. I did not scheme or manipulate or cause harm to anyone who did not choose to cause harm first. I just showed up, did my job, got treated like I was disposable, and then accepted the tools that were offered to me and built something real with them. The CEO took a check. The hatchet man delivered bad news without blinking. Corporate stayed quiet until the last possible moment. And when it was all over, the only people who came out of that story with something to be proud of were the 12 people standing in that back room, and the man who had the handbook in his hands and the wisdom to read every single word. $400,000. Absorbed into the end-of-year discretionary cost analysis. Of a store that no longer existed. I genuinely hope it was worth the clothing store's check. Now I have to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. Was what that manager did wrong? He followed the policy, word for word, within the boundaries of his authority, in a store that was being closed without notice or severance for any of his team. He did not steal. He did not forge documents. He applied a rule that the company itself had written. And in doing so, he gave 12 people the resources to start over. The hatchet man came back one more time. I did not expect it. Nobody did. It was a Thursday, maybe 4 days before our last official day, and I was behind the camera counter doing absolutely nothing with great professionalism when he walked through the front entrance again. No phone call ahead. No appointment. Just the same pressed shirt and the same clipboard and the same expression that sat somewhere between boredom and low-grade contempt. He moved through the floor like he was inspecting a property he had already mentally vacated, which I suppose he had. He stopped at my counter. He looked at the camera display case, then looked at me, and said, and I am giving you this verbatim because it has lived in my head ever since. You know, for someone who supposedly knows cameras, you never really moved much product, did you? I checked the person numbers. You were never actually a top performer. Just so you know. My hands went still on the glass countertop. I did not move them. I just let them rest there, flat, while something cold moved through my chest and settled low in my stomach. Because here is the thing about that sentence, it was not accurate. Not even close to accurate. My person's sales numbers were strong every quarter I worked there. He either had not looked at the real data or he had looked at it and decided the truth was less useful to him than a small, clean cut delivered on his way out the door. Either way, the intention was the same. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted to make sure that on my way out, I understood how he had categorized me. A nobody. A replaceable body behind a glass case. Someone who had never really mattered in the first place. I looked at him for a moment before I answered. I kept my voice completely flat. I said, okay. That was it. Just okay. Because he was not worth a single syllable more, and because I already knew something he did not know, that in about 96 hours, I was going to be walking out of this store with $13,000 worth of professional equipment for just over $1,100, and that the company he represented was going to absorb every cent of that loss into a cost analysis that would never actually be conducted. I knew that. He did not. And that asymmetry felt like enough. He made a note on his clipboard and walked away. I stood there for another minute with my hands still flat on the glass, breathing slowly, letting the tightness in my gut work itself out.
Then I picked up a lens cloth and started wiping down the display case, because the cameras needed to look good, and because taking care of the things I loved was something I was not willing to stop doing just because a man with a clipboard had tried to make me feel like I never had. That evening I found Marcus in the break room. He was eating a sandwich and reading something on his phone, and he looked up when I came in and immediately said, "You have the face." I said, "What face?" "The face where the hatchet man said something to you and you are pretending it did not land." I sat down across from him and told him what happened. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I always appreciated about him. When I finished, he set down his sandwich and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I tell you something I found out this week? Something I was not sure whether to bring up." I said yes. He told me that before our manager had called corporate to get the full story, he had already been tipped off. Not by the fire marshal. By someone inside the corporate office, an administrative coordinator who had been with the company for over a decade and who had watched this deal develop from the inside. She had reached out to our manager privately, through a personal email, because she believed what was being done to our team was wrong and she wanted someone to know before it was too late to do anything about it. She had also told him one other thing. Something she had seen in the internal documentation before it was finalized. The clothing brand's offer had actually included a clause, a rider, that would have provided transition assistance to the displaced employees of whatever store vacated the space. A basic package. Severance equivalent, letters of reference, that kind of thing. Standard professional courtesy. Corporate had negotiated that clause out of the final agreement. It had not been an oversight. It had not been a clerical gap or a detail that slipped through in the rush to close the deal. Someone had looked at that rider and made a deliberate choice to remove it. To make sure that the 12 people who had spent 5 years building the sales record that made this location worth selling in the first place walked away with absolutely nothing. Marcus said it quietly, without drama. Just the facts, delivered in the flat tone of someone who has already finished being angry about them and arrived somewhere harder and more useful. I sat with that for a long moment. A clause. A rider. Transition assistance. There. Then gone. Removed by a person sitting in a corporate office who had decided that our futures were a negotiating chip they were willing to give up. I thought about the hatchet man's face earlier that day. His clipboard. His not quite accurate line about my sales numbers, delivered like a small parting gift of diminishment. I thought about 5 years of record performance in a store that should not have been able to fail. I thought about 12 people who showed up every day and did the work and trusted, the way you trust when you have been given no reason not to, that the institution would behave with some basic decency when the time came. They had been given the chance to do right by us. It had been written into the deal. And someone had taken a pen and crossed it out. I said thank you to Marcus. He picked up his sandwich again. I walked back out onto the floor. That night I drove home the long way. I did not have a reason to. I just was not ready to be inside yet. I parked eventually and sat in the car in the dark for a while. The city moved around me, indifferent, which felt correct. I thought about the hatchet man's words. They were still there. That is the thing nobody tells you, even the words you know are not true still take up space. You cannot simply dismiss them because you have evidence against them. They sit in the room with you and you have to decide, over and over, whether to let them define anything. I was not a top performer. Just so you know. I thought about the clause that had been removed. The one that had existed, briefly, as acknowledgement that human beings were going to be displaced by this transaction and that they deserved something for it. The fact that it had existed at all meant someone in that negotiation had understood the moral weight of what they were doing. And then someone else had decided that weight was not worth carrying. That detail did something to me that pure anger could not. Anger is loud. It moves fast and burns out. This was quieter. This was the particular clarity that comes when you understand, completely and finally, that you were never going to be protected by the institution you served. Not because they forgot. Not because they were careless. Because they looked at the option to protect you and chose against it. I sat in the car and I let that be true. I thought about the cameras. The ones I had been building my pile around in the back room. The shotgun microphone. The hard drives. The tripod that would hold a camera steady in conditions that would have made the cheap one wobble. I had not bought any of it yet. 2 more days. I thought about what Marcus had said when I paid. You just bought your way out. Don't waste it. I thought about the technical questions I had asked a store manager years ago, before any of this existed, just because I loved cameras and wanted to understand them. I had built that knowledge myself. Nobody had given it to me. Nobody could remove it from the negotiating table because it was not on the table, it was inside me, and it had been there long before I ever walked through that store's front door. Short sentences live in your head when you are at the bottom of something. Not paragraphs. Not arguments. Just small clean facts that hold. I built this. They chose wrong. I know my numbers. 2 more days. I started the car. I drove home. I went to sleep early, and in the morning I went back to work, and I took care of the cameras the way I always had, because the work was still worth doing and the things I loved were still worth tending to, no matter who had tried to make me feel otherwise. The lesson I took from all of it is this: people who count on your silence to protect their lies are always shocked when you stop being silent. Was I wrong to do what I did, or did they get exactly what they earned? Let me know in the comments. Or was it exactly what any decent human being would have done when a corporation showed its hand? I know what I think. But I want to know what you think. Tell me in the comments, and if you have ever worked for a company that treated people like this, tell me that too. Because I have a feeling this story is not as rare as it should be.